let's move on to some interesting analysis over at MSNBC. There have been a number of pieces now recently, and I think justifiably so, about Democratic concerns that Black voters and Black men in particular may not show up for them in 2024. And they're looking at the numbers. They're looking at the fact that in 2022, in a lot of demographics, particularly among like suburban white women and white men, that there was a surge for the Democratic ticket, and that's what forestalled the red wave. But if you dig into those numbers, there were some troubling signs among Black men in the cities. It's not that they showed up and voted for Republicans, it's that they just didn't show up. There was a fall off in the vote for Black men, in particular in urban areas. So MSNBC decided to do some reporting on this. There's also a lot of hand-wringing here about Cornel West, who, of course, running as the Green Party on the Green Party line. So they're concerned about what he might do in terms of voters overall, but Black voters in particular. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
Joe Biden became the first Democrat to win a presidential election in Georgia since 1992 when he won in 2020. And just to show how crucial Black voters were to that win, by our calculations, if less than 1% of Black voters stayed home or voted for Trump, the outcome of this election could have been very different. And basically something that we heard on the ground from the director of organizer from the New Georgia Project, which is easily pushing the largest voters registration efforts in the state. They've registered about 30,000 people alone this year. He said people are just frankly not running and jumping about another term of President Biden, and they're frankly keeping their options open. And that's something that I heard from voters consistently, is that while they're aware that Joe Biden could be the default, they're still wanting to see who else could potentially get in this race. At least one voter told me they were considering Cornel West, but the majority of people here said, even though they may just be voting for Joe Biden in the end of this, their big concerns right now is the economy. They're still feeling the stress of inflation, and jobs are drying up in the state. Even though we've seen some of this good economic data, we just haven't seen those perceptions seem to catch up yet. And as you mentioned, these unfulfilled promises. Student debt was something that we heard consistently from voters, that they really wanted to see that policy come to fruition. But obviously, after the Supreme Court struck it down, we know Biden is trying again, but they were really disappointed that that hasn't happened yet.
And you mentioned Cornel West, who by any measure is a pretty fringe candidate, but we all remember Jill Stein in 2016. If West even pulls off a sliver of voters, Black voters in particular, that could be the difference in some of these states. So tell us, what's the Biden campaigns? Are they aware of this potential issue, and what's their plan to try to make sure they keep those voters in line?
Certainly strategists have raised concerns about third-party candidates, not just Cornel West, but also this no labels candidates that we're hearing about. But I think the thing that the Biden world is banking on is Donald Trump. Their hope is that if he is in fact the nominee, that will galvanize people in the same way that it did in 2020. There was voters who purely cast a vote against Donald Trump, and they're hoping that threats to democracy and him being on the ballot again will have the same effect that it did then.
There's so much to unpack in that analysis.
That was wild.
Right? There's so much to unpack there.
Whoa.
First of all, so what do voters tell this reporter that they're concerned about? First of all, they're like, what are my other options here? Because I'm not sold on Joe Biden. Of course, this is a network that like studiously avoids covering the fact that Joe Biden actually has opponents in the primary. And these voters do have other choices that they could evaluate. So there's that. The voters told this reporter, hey, my number one is the economy. I'm worried about the economy. And by the way, you know, I'm pretty disappointed about how this whole student debt thing has gone down. And what is the White House's theory of the case? It's like, yeah, well, we're not going to really do anything on that, but we're hoping that Donald Trump is enough to, in the words of that host, keep these voters in line, as if anyone is entitled to anyone's vote and doesn't have to go out there and earn it. And then, of course, there's the, you know, spurious analysis that it was Jill Stein's fault that the Democrats screwed up 2016, and that, you know, if they lose this time, it won't be their fault again. It'll be the fault of Cornel West or the fault of potentially Joe Manchin, no labels ticket, whatever.
Yeah, it's not anybody's fault except yours for not getting people to want to vote for you. You know, even in the latest New York Times poll, they have a really interesting graphic. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, which even shows you that, quote, Trump has made gains amongst men, Black, Hispanic, low-income, less educated voters. That's one of the reasons why it's a tighter race, is mainly, it seems to do, because of these additional Trump gains. So, Krystal, Trump has made gains amongst all of the demographics, which Democrats take for granted. And now, whenever as she said, oh, we can only lose less than 1% and something like that would still have an impact, it's like, well, you know, it's not difficult. Do something for these people and maybe they'll vote for you. But you can't be blaming Cornel West for Also, there's also something very racist about that. I'll never stop thinking. It's like, what, because he's a black guy, you think black people are going to go vote for him? Is that it? It's like, is that where you're reducing people to?
Yes,
You think
that
people
is.
are so stupid?
Yes, that is what they're.
How can you
reducing people
say
to.
that? I mean, it's outrageous. You know, imagine if people were like, "Oh, Vivek Ramaswamy, Saagar's going to support him, right? Because he's an Indian guy." I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? That's not how people. Most normal people are like, "Oh, he's a white guy. I'm going to go vote for somebody because he's white." What are we saying? But apparently, like, whenever it's black people and we're talking about it, that it's okay to just reduce people down to that function. It's ridiculous. It's deeply racist.
It's so funny you say that because I was just reading this morning. I think it was in Politico. This similar like type of concern about what's going on. How are they going to win? How are we going to convince black voters that it's worth it to come out and vote, even though they feel like their lives have not gotten better under Joe Biden in the same way they didn't feel their lives got better under Republican presidents as well. It's just like, very understandable apathy there. And all of the Democratic spokespeople, leaders, DNC types that they interviewed were like, oh, we know what's going to get black voters to the polls. It's the fact that we have Kamala Harris on the ticket.
No, it's not.
It's the fact that we put Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. It's the fact, this one really made me chuckle, that we have Hakeem Jeffries as minority leader. Do you think there is a single person in the entire country that is going to change their vote based on the fact that Hakeem Jeffries is in a position of power?
No.
And like, listen, representation is important. It's not nothing. But when you're talking about what actually matters, like these voters are telling you what is important to them. It doesn't take rocket science to figure out the way to message to people and like not just a message, to actually deliver for people so they feel like they have some sort of freaking stake in this election. Washington Post had a piece with a lot of this very similar analysis. Let's put this up on the screen. They say Democrats worry their most loyal voters, that would be black voters, won't turn out for Biden in 2024. They got a quote here. Let's put this up on the screen from the founder of the Black Male Voter Project, a guy named W. Mondale Robinson. He says, quote, "The Democratic Party has been failing epically at reaching this demographic of black men, and that's sad to say. Black men are your second most stable base overwhelmingly, and you can't reach them in a way that makes your work easier." I appreciate the way that he frames that, because so much of the analysis of this, it's almost like blaming black men. Like that host said, he's like, how do we get them in line? Like, I just find that framing so disgusting. So I appreciate the way that he's framing this as, listen, the onus is on you all to explain why people should bother to show up and vote for you. And most of what comes out in this piece is the Democratic strategy is just like, oh, we need a new field program. We need to put some more money into like voter outreach and whatever. And like, okay, sure. But if you're not selling something that is compelling to people, all the voter outreach in the world isn't going to do a damn thing. They also cite a poll here, Washington Post Ipsos poll, Black Americans back in May found what they describe as a tepid reaction to Biden's re-election, something that I'm sure many people can relate to out there. Only 17% of Black Americans said they would be enthusiastic if he wins. 48% said they'd be satisfied but not enthusiastic. 25% said they would be dissatisfied but not angry. And 8% said they would be angry about another Biden term. So just keep in mind, some of these shifts might be small, few percentage points here, few percentage points there. But we're talking about the last time these two men went up against each other, it was razor thin.
What you're just talking about just loses the state of Georgia. That's it. 10,000 votes.
That's
Boom.
it.
You just lost.
And that's where
Georgia.
these interviews were taking place, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, there's a lot of people. You know, you switch things up a little bit in terms of voter turnout in inner city Philadelphia, the whole thing goes a whole another way. Same thing, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, many of these other cities with large black populations. If the rain is a little bit there, if there's a little vibe in the city that, I actually don't like Biden that much, well, Trump just won the presidency. And every single one of these places. That was Wisconsin, Michigan as well, Detroit. It's one of those where it's very clear here that you barely won the presidency, and then they don't act like it by either doing anything. And then whenever it does come time to vote, you come and you scold these people because a black guy is on the ticket and they think so little of them that they're going to go and vote for them. I always think about this story, but the majority of black voters supported Hillary Clinton in the 2008 primary until Obama actually started winning votes. So it's one of those where it's like, yeah, they knew the black guy was running. It was not enough for them. How many times we have to go over the fact that Kamala didn't win a lot of black votes in South Carolina? That's one of the reasons that she dropped out. Same with Cory Booker. The two black candidates in the race actually had to drop out or didn't even make it because they were getting so low. They ended up voting for Biden and for Bernie because people don't think that way. And we never learned that, and apparently it's permissible. And even in our race-obsessed media, I don't know why they don't get called out on it.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that they are correct that they have a problem with Cornel West. I do think it is a problem for them. It is a problem entirely of their own making. And to the extent, I'm sure there are going to be black voters among many other voters, in particular young voters, who cast their ballots for Cornel West. It doesn't have anything to do with the color of his skin. It has to do with the ideas that he's pushing and the fact that he has demonstrated over his life a commitment to working class people and making sure that their material lives are improved. So they need to reflect. If they actually want to win, they need to reflect on what voters are actually telling them and not what they imagine voters want to hear or to see from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.